Good afternoon, sir. I remember you being sworn in. Would you state your name for the record, please?
Jeffrey Candage.
Sir, are you currently employed?
No, I'm retired.
Were you employed on December 5th, 2010?
Yes, I was.
How were you employed, sir?
I was employed as a full-time business agent with the Teamsters Union Local 385 in Raleigh.
And you served as the representative of Mr. Flesh during the internal affairs investigation?
I did.
And you're also present with him at the last chance hearing that occurred on February 17, 2011, is that right?
I did.
Okay. Who else was present, sir, at that February 17, 2011 meeting other than yourself, Mr. Flesh?
I believe Sheriff Johnson, Chief Deputy Bill Lee, Major Bobby Jones, Lieutenant Bobby Goggin. There may have been others, but those I recall.
And that meeting was tape recorded, correct?
Yes, it was.
And have you ever heard a recording of that meeting?
Yes, I have.
And sir, during that meeting, did Mr. Flesh advise the sheriff that he had been diagnosed with PTSD?
Yes.
And approximately how long into the meeting did Deputy Flesh or Mr. Flesh do that? Approximately.
Well, not very long, because I think the entire session lasted 20, 30 minutes, so I would guesstimate approximately 10.
Okay. And how did Mr. Flesh bring up this PTSD? Do you remember how he raised that issue?
My recollection is he referenced having a substance abuse issue with alcohol, and that he should have had it addressed more effectively at an earlier date.
And did he indicate why he didn't have it addressed more adequately or addressed at all at an earlier date?
Well, I don't think he said that he didn't have it addressed at all, that he had indicated that it wasn't addressed adequately, either during or after his military service.
Okay. And Mr. Flesh indicated that the PTSD arose from his service in Iraq?
That's correct.
Now, how did the sheriff appear to take this statement by Mr. Flesh that he was suffering from PTSD?
He didn't appear to give it much weight.
Okay. Would it be fair to say he didn't give much weight at all?
Objection. I don't know how Mr. Candage can tell what's in the sheriff's mind as to weight. I think that.
Well, let's go through the sheriff's statements, and maybe that'll bring more light into this subject. Did the sheriff ask Mr. Flesh any questions about his PTSD diagnosis?
I don't recall him. I recall him making statements, but I don't recall there being any questions specific to the PTSD diagnosis. No.
Did he ask him about? Did the sheriff ask Mr. Flesh about what treatment he might have been receiving?
No.
Did he ask him how the treatment was going?
No.
Did he ask him who was providing the treatment?
No.
Did he ask him where he's being provided the treatment?
No.
Did he ask him how he thought his treatment was going?
No.
Did he ask him if he felt better?
No.
Okay. What did the sheriff say when Mr. Flesh brought up the PTSD issue?
That won't be a simple answer, but briefly, he suggested that the symptoms relative to the PTSD preceded his employment with the sheriff's office, indeed preceded his being in the military. He followed that up with encouraging and supporting his continued treatment, whatever treatment he was receiving, relative to the substance abuse issues and any other issues that he might have.
Did the sheriff make any remarks about Mr. Flesh's criminal history prior to coming to the sheriff's court?
Extensively.
And to the extent you can recall, what remarks did he make?
My recollection, both of that meeting and listening to the tape, was that he was reading off documents that were chronicling any law enforcement contacts that Deputy Flesh may have had prior to his employment with the Volusia County Sheriff's Office.
Okay. And during the hearing, sir, did the sheriff indicate whether or not he took or was taking those arrests those instances that occurred previous to Mr. Flesh's employment in consideration in making his termination decision?
Yes, he did.
What did he say?
While he indicated that in and of themselves, the individual instances did not necessarily carry much weight, but they formed a pattern of behavior. The instance that brought us to that meeting being the final chapter of those line of similar events.
So if I'm hearing it correctly, it seemed to you that the sheriff was taking these pre-employment instances as evidence combined with the incident that occurred on December 5th, 2010, that Mr. Flesh, if he continues employment, would reoffend.
I'm going to put an objection on the record, so that is a leading question. I have to object to that. And again, I think Mr. Candage can testify to his personal observations, but he can't get into the sheriff's head. That's my objection.
I asked him to testify about what his conclusion.
No,
Excuse me. I asked him to testify what his conclusion was about what the sheriff was saying during the hearing.
may I speak
And-
now? Are you done?
In a moment.
Okay.
And you led the sheriff from here, there, and to the moon and back.
You
And
could
you
have
did it at the
objected,
same
sir.
time. You did it at the same time, just like I'm trying to do now.
He could have objected if my questions were in fact leading. My objection is that is a leading question, there's no doubt about it, and I am going to put an objection on the record. And again, my perception of his questions was he's getting Mr. Candage to testify to what the sheriff's thought process is.
I understand that the question was probably leading, and I understand that it happens about every third question on either side, and it does help speed things along. In this case, I'd like to go ahead and finish up your line of questioning quickly. Yeah? Sounds
Can you
good.
read the question back then? So I can't recall what it was.
Good, just give me a few minutes.
Sure.
I think I can respond to the question.
Go ahead.
Do you recall it? Okay, good.
Well, yeah, it was somewhat convoluted, but I get the gist of it.
You woo me, sir. Go ahead.
In any event, yes, his comments relative to his past events, whether they were arrests, whether the arrests that resulted in dismissals, because many of those events resulted in dismissals. And my understanding was that these happened many years in the past, maybe even while he was a teenager. But the way the sheriff presented them is sort of to put it in context with his instance with the DUI arrest effected by the Candage Police Department. So did I get the impression that this was being used almost as a progressive discipline type issue? Yes, that's exactly how I took that.
Okay. Now, didn't the sheriff tell Mr. Flesh, I mean, I have an exact quote, but I think it's pretty close. Scott, if this were a one-time incident referring to the December 5th, 2010 arrest, by God, I could walk you to the line.
I recall something of that effect.
What did you take that to mean, sir?
My thought would be is that absent his pre-employment history, that this would not be a terminable issue.
Okay. Now, do you recall the sheriff telling Mr. Flesh during that meeting that his previous arrests were too much baggage and prevented him from changing his termination decision?
Yes.
During the termination hearing, you asked that a determination of discipline be postponed pending the outcome of the criminal proceeding, correct?
I did.
And how did that go over? Well, let me ask you a different question. How did the sheriff respond?
I was unsuccessful in asking for that deferment. Yes.
The sheriff said no.
Correct.
And you even brought up Anthony Zimmer as a comparator during the hearing, didn't you?
I believe I did.
As a situation where the IA was postponed pending the outcome of criminal case, correct?
I don't know the status of an IA because I didn't represent him internally on the case, so I can't speak authoritatively to that.
You did bring up Anthony Zimmer during the course of that meeting, right?
I did.
Why did you bring him up?
Well, the disposition of his criminal case had an impact on his internal. They did not, to my understanding, and again, I don't have an authoritative opinion on that since I didn't represent him, but whatever internal remedies they took against him in terms of discipline was not meted out until the conclusion of the criminal aspect of the case.
Okay, you wanted to take consideration, Mr. Flesh.
I did.
Now, in response to that, didn't the sheriff say that Anthony Zimmer's situation was a one-time incident?
That's exactly what he said.
And he said that Mr. Flesh has had a history of arrest going back years.
I don't remember if those were his exact words, but that suggestion was made, yes.
Did you know the deputy sheriff, oh, strike that. We all know this incident occurred on December 5th, 2010. When did you first learn of it? Next day, the day after?
Very shortly thereafter, yes.
And at some point in the days following that arrest, did you learn that Deputy Flesh was going into treatment at the VA?
Yes.
How did you learn of that?
Well, he and I discussed it. I was put in, I probably was aware of this incident within 24 hours, and probably within that same 24 hours, I would have reached out to him.
Okay.
Or a steward of the sheriff's office would have put him in touch with me.
Okay. And did you pass along Mr. Flesh's statement that he was going to seek treatment in the VA to anybody in the Sheriff's Department?
Yes, I did.
Who?
Probably to both Sheriff Johnson and Chief Deputy Lee.
Did they give you any reaction at all?
I don't remember what their reaction was to that.
No further questions.
Hi, Mr. Candage, nice to meet you. I've seen your initials through the documents.
I'm sure.
Do you recall from recollection from that interview, or that